Hi, everyone. I'm thrilled today to be speaking with Kara Jarzynski. She's a fascinating lady who started with some other folks an organization with a interesting name called Resolutionaries, and we will get into exactly what that means in a bit. Uh, Kara has a lengthy and impressive bio. I don't want to waste time on that, but she's worked in the corporate world and she's worked for many companies, Fortune 500 included. But in 2002, she met a gentleman who had a vision for a better way for our country to bridge the divide and find common ground. And that's what the essence of this conversation is about. I hope our City Biz audience enjoys it and finds it thought provoking as well. Kara, welcome. I'm pleased to have you join us.
Thank you, David. It's really fun to be here for sure, and a worthy conversation to be
Well,
had.
I'm sure that'll be the case. So, um, maybe an obvious place to start is where did that name come from? It's a take on revolution or resolution. What does resolutionaries mean, and what's the thought process behind the name, and more importantly, behind the organization uh, that is entitled that name?
Our founder and CEO is a man named Dennis Cohen, who was started off his career as an attorney doing family law litigation. And he very quickly realized that that was a really hard way to go and that it wasn't really helping a lot of people at the end of the day. I mean, certainly they were taking care of what they needed to take care of, but it wasn't necessarily in the a way that led to a greater sense of prosperity or resolution. And he turned to mediation in his own practice as a much better way to go. And then in that process, he really realized that the techniques he was using in mediation between families who were really at their worst could be used for a greater national and community sense. And with that, he founded the organization Resolutionaries to say there's a better way. We can turn from our, instead of fighting over our problems, we can work together to solve them, to find resolution.
And how do you do that? Do you actually facilitate mediations yourself? Do you try to pass legislation somehow that might do that? What is the method you use to achieve this lofty goal?
The answer is two pronged, I suppose. We began doing small town halls in our local community. That's where the organization was founded. And in those town halls, we take really difficult topics to discuss: gun control, abortion, vaccines during COVID. And we would facilitate a conversation around those difficult topics, not to find a solution, let's be clear, but rather to help people learn how to begin the conversation around it. What does active listening look like? How do you invite someone who has a very different opinion from yours? How do you listen to that? How do you engage? Those were the questions. Then in 20 my gosh, at the end of 2021, um, Dennis approached me about joining the organization officially as the executive director because, and this is where we get to the advocacy and the legislation, there was a bill in Congress that was introduced for the 117th called the Building Civic Bridges Act. And it was introduced, but it died in committee. And Dennis was really heartbroken because he saw this piece of legislation as a key need for our nation. The Building Civic Bridges Act, it would provide grants for organizations who are facilitating this type of conversation in communities. It would fund research to figure out what is the best efficacious method to have these sorts of conversations. It would train AmeriCorps volunteers who are already embedded into the community into how to have these soft skills. And it would create a conversation around the importance of healing this polarization that's really taking over a large part of our culture. And the bill for the 117th didn't pass, it died in committee. And he called me up and he said, I want you to do something about that. And I said, okay, let's do something about that. And so that has been our work. In that process, I am proud to say that on March 15th, it was reintroduced in the House. And on April 18th, it was reintroduced in the Senate with bipartisan support in both, which is it's key to the success of this legislation. And we have amassed a giant coalition of organizations, businesses, influential people of note who are all saying enough is enough with this crazy polarization. It has way, way too many impacts on our economy, our business, national security, and just our communities and families. And that coalition is saying, let's do something about it. And this bill is the only active piece of legislation that gets to the heart of that problem.
I'm really curious. I do know a lot of the great organizations working with you to have this legislation passed, and it seems like such a no-brainer. I'm trying to imagine who would oppose this act. Is it something very specific they oppose? Is it the general concept? I mean, I'm imagine there's no congressman out there saying I'm in favor of polarization and we need to increase the animosity in this country. So what? Yes, yeah. So what is the thought process from those who oppose it, or is it just stalled that people don't want to get involved? Yeah, give me an idea what's preventing it from immediate action.
Well, here's the thing, the train is moving now. So I would say it was stalled quite a bit, and now it's moving. It's been introduced, it's active, and I'm going to add in a new piece of information. The federal government knows it works. And here's the proof point for it. In our federal budget, we spend $315 million a year through the National Endowment for Democracy for the type of work that the BCBA does, but we spend that $315 million in other countries. The amount that we spend domestically for this problem, for pro-democracy efforts and initiatives, is zero. Internationally, 315 million. So our government knows it works, and our government knows it's important. The question now is, will they turn some of that time and attention and funds to help what's happening here at home? And to your point, David, I can't imagine anyone who would say no. So right now, it's simply a matter of awareness. Let's make sure everyone's aware that the Building Civic Bridges Act has been reintroduced and it needs to get out of committee and it needs to come up on the floor for a vote.
And would I be correct in assuming, and I could be totally incorrect, do you have support from both sides of the aisle? Or
We
you
do.
do? Okay.
We
That's
do. We do. It's bipartisan. And because when you look at the bill, what it supports is dialogue, debate, the free exchange of ideas. It's pro democracy and pro community and helping to bring people together, not to say one side is better than the other, but rather, how do we heal these divisions in our nation to be able to progress forward as a government and as a nation?
Well, I wish you the great success on this. Our country certainly needs it. So at the same time, you're working on the Building Civic Bridges Act. Are you still doing the local community facilitation work, or are you focused now solely on the act? What are your other components of resolutionaries?
We do have some local efforts that we've begun to remount, but I would say that they are more limited in scope at this point, simply because the piece of legislation is so key to all of the efforts that are happening in this space to heal polarization at a national level. And the resources we are expending to that end are a lot. And the reason why is that the stakes are high. People know polarization is bad, but I don't hear the stats around polarization a lot. Do you mind really quickly if I run some of those stats off, particularly?
Please, no, I don't. I think our audience, city biz audience, would love it. Please.
Yeah, you have a business-based audience, correct?
We certainly do. Yes.
So let's jump to the stats of how polarization affects business and the economy. Um, when when years that polarization is high, there is an economist out of the Federal Reserve in Virginia. Her name is Marina Azamonte. And she's done a lot of research on polarization's impact on the economy. And she has found that when those years when polarization is especially high, it results in a 27% decline in corporate investment. Let me ask you something. If the stock market went down by 27%, what do you think the reaction would be in this country?
Clearly, the typical reaction that everybody would be upset, but politicians would normally blame the other politician.
Right. But here's the thing, corporate investment, it's a hidden cost. It doesn't come out front. So like that's huge. In addition, the interest rates go up, not only for corporate accounts, but also when Fitch downgraded our credit as a nation, what that resulted in was an increase in interest that the American government has to pay on our federal debt. So anyone who has a credit card, you know what that means. When your credit goes down, your interest rate goes up, and that means you're paying more for money you've already borrowed. And that's what happened in the debt ceiling crisis last summer. Polarization, they're fighting over it. They can't figure out the debt ceiling. There's the whole thing with the speaker fiasco, and what that leads to, downgrading credit, increase in interest, and now how much many more billions of dollars have been added to our federal debt simply because they were fighting in Congress.
And when Dennis Cohen first approached you, did had you already had an interest in this area, or did he pique your interest by presenting this concept to you? Uh, were you already involved in bridging the divide or common ground facilitations? Uh,
Yeah, I was doing facilitation, I was doing work to inspire and help, but it was through a corporate lens. The corporations that I would work with would their bottom line was always how do we increase our 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 bottom line. I mean, that was always at the end of the day, whatever program we were carrying out throughout the company, at the end of the day, it was all about how to increase the bottom line. But one of the things that I found, no matter the program that was being implemented, was at the end of the day, the core piece that had to happen in order for corporations to increase their bottom line was that employees had to work better together. And for that, they needed to be more understanding. They needed some skills in conversation. They needed to also be able to work with their customers better, which meant not talking all the time, but actually listening to the customer and really understanding what the customer needed. And then being able to respond directly to that customer. All of those are all conversation skills, and they're all based in respect and kindness.
well, you mentioned corporations, and you have a significant corporate background. Uh, are they involved in trying to pass the Civic Building Bridges Act, or are they worried that somehow this obviously nonpartisan, bipartisan uh, congressional act, are they worried somehow they'll be drawn into the fray? How's that work for you?
No, actually, there are a lot of businesses that are incredibly concerned that polarization is going to heavily impact their bottom line, not only because of consumer behavior. When things are uncertain, consumers don't purchase things at the same rate, but also in the office, political disagreements have actually reduced productivity, lower work quality, increased workplace hostility. And I'll quantify that with a number. In 2008, there was a study, and that was quite some time ago, that the cost of that conflict resolution in businesses was to the tune of $359 billion a year. Now, in 2023, the number of conflict hours has actually increased, and it's estimated that the cost to businesses just to handle conflict resolution between employees in the workplace costs $448.75 billion. So, to that end, there are actually quite a few businesses and business organizations that are supporting the bill: Business Roundtable, Business for America, state business executives, the US Chamber of Commerce. These are all organizations, for example, that are members of greater numbers of actual corporations that are all behind the bill because it's good for business and it's good for the economy.
And am I correct in assuming that if uh, you have corporate involvement, business involvement, we need citizen involvement? How would citizens get involved? Just write their congressman? Is that?
Yeah, that's a good place to start. And you know what's interesting is I've spoken with people and they'll go like, it doesn't matter. Not true. Not true at all. Because when I talk with congressional offices, and this is a direct quote from someone at one of the offices with whom we work. The staffer said, "Look, we get tons of letters. We get tons of phone calls. But what they are is a form letter because there's some organization that has a petition. And what happens is it's all the same letter over and over again." So he said, look, he's mentioned one particular campaign for which in 1 week they got 5,000 letters, but it was all the same letter. So he said, guess how many letters those 5,000 letters actually count for? One, because it's all the same letter. But he said because individual constituents so rarely actually take the time to write out a well thought out, well argued letter in support of something that needs to be taken care of, when an office actually gets it, they consider that worth 100 letters at least. Because if one person took the time, there's at least 100 others in their district that feel the same way.
Well, I hope everybody listening to this, the business community, can get involved and help pass this legislation. And citizens, as you said, I don't think they realize the power they have of an individual, creative, factual letter can have for members of Congress, particularly if you tell them your role in the community. You are their constituents, so I think they have more power than they think. But we're running out of time. I want to end with this one question: if the act does pass, um, what do you envision the resulting change would be 5 years from now, 6 or 7 years? How would that make our country better? What would be is your vision or goal as to what we would see as a result of it?
I would hope that the very core of what our founder says all the time, that he really hopes that we turn from fighting over our problems to working together to solve them. There's a lot of things that our nation and our world that needs to be fixed. And none of that gets fixed if we're in a posture of defense, we're in a posture of power, as opposed to being in a posture where our nation is a good nation. It's not perfect. It's not 100% a utopia glowing in the sky. But you know what? There's a lot of things that are really good about it. And we hold an incredible place in this world and for democracy itself. And it's worth taking a pause and saying, let's figure out how to work together. Let's take a moment and look for the wisest course of action as opposed to my course of action or your course of action. Let's find the wisest one.
Well, that's a perfect way to end. Hopefully, on that uplifting note, things are tough out there now. Citizens tend to give up hope, but let's figure out how we can work together to solve our problems together. And with more people like you and Mr. Cohen and organizations like Resolutionaries, I, for one, remain optimistic. So thank you so much for your time, Kara. I very much appreciate it. Thank you.